Good evening and welcome to the Unitarian Church. Our program tonight is entitled Man-Made Earthquakes, Toxic Fracking Waste Injection Wells, Open Fracking Waste Impoundment Pits, and What a Community Bill of Rights Means for Communities. Finding Common Ground, Not Shaky Ground.
Lord, I thank you for all who have heard your clarion call this evening to come to this town hall meeting. Please help us to put aside any differences and work together to find a solution to save our communities from the toxic trespass that threatens our very lives. Open our blinded eyes and deaf ears to see and receive truth, even if it is contrary to our own preconceived notions and opinions. And once we know better, Lord, you require us to do better. Help us to stand up, to speak out, to do right, even when silence appears to be a more convenient option. Help us to do these things so that our children, our grandchildren, and all the generations to come may be able to breathe clean air and drink clean water and live lives that are long and healthy. Amen.
All right. We're going to have the 3 short videos right now. The first one is actually a new video done by the Weather Channel, Inside Climate News, and the Center for Public Integrity. It's called Fracking the Eagle Ford Shale, and that's in Texas. And the next one will be an excerpt from a film called Unearthed, The Fracking Facade. And the third one will be a brief excerpt from a YouTube video published on September 28th, 2013. It's a Mount Pleasant Township, PA supervisors meeting on 4 impoundments for shale drilling fluids.
At night sometimes, there's a flame over there that the whole sky is like burning. I mean, it looks like an inferno or something.
There's stuff coming up into my throat and my nose is shutting down and I can't get a breath.
Texas was a very poor agrarian state until oil was discovered. And I would suggest that in large measure our state government is both funded and controlled by this industry.
I can control what my kids eat, I can control what goes on their skin, but I can't control the air that's coming across from the neighbors.
Being 40 miles back on some ranch with nothing but a little indicator that says the H2S is present in the area, that stuff's so dangerous, it's 1,000 parts per million, you're dead.
The Eagle Ford Shale formation is about 400 miles long and about 50 miles wide. It's away from the big cities. It's not near population centers like Dallas, Fort Worth. So it's mostly rural. It is a generally poorer area of Texas. And for some reason, it has not gotten a lot of attention nationally.
It's also arguably the largest economic development area in the entire world right now. There are a lot of different companies operating there. There's an enormous amount of investment flowing into the Eagle Ford, and it's just been an absolute game changer.
There is a rush to some newly discovered oil fields in this country.
The Eagle Ford Shale in the district I represent has created over 400,000 jobs and roughly $2.6 billion in salaries in a 13-county area.
You have thousands of wells now in the Eagle Ford, and this boom has been going really strong for at least 2 years, but you don't have any state air monitors in the places where the drilling is really booming. And if you don't have air monitors, You don't know what's in the air.
I think air pollution associated with fracking, because it involves chemicals like hydrogen sulfide, because it involves carcinogens like benzene, could end up being a bigger public health threat than, let's say, contaminated groundwater. I think what they are saying in Texas, or the few who have spoken out, can we just slow it down a little bit and make sure that we're not poisoning people? Almost a year ago, I began traveling to South Texas to see for myself what's happening in the Eagle Ford. 7,000 oil and gas wells have been sunk in this region. Another 5,000 are on the way. This is Karnes County, the epicenter of the boom. New wells, relentless truck traffic, flares everywhere. The industry says all of this is safe, but some people are worried.
For myself, I've experienced a lot of difficulty with my breathing.
I used to come out here, this very park, before all that was there, and run literally about 4 or 5 miles a day without any problems. Now I barely get a mile out before I start choking. It's just something heavier with the air.
I have 2.5 acres and I can't bring my grandchild out here to enjoy it because I'm afraid for his health.
For the past 8 months, Inside Climate News, the Weather Channel, and the Center for Public Integrity have investigated air pollution in this region. Oil and gas companies release thousands of tons of dangerous chemicals into the air each year. Those gases, which include benzene, carbon monoxide, and formaldehyde, soar into the sky. Then they land on schools, hospitals, and people's homes. People in the Eagle Ford say they're getting sick, and their symptoms match the kinds of problems caused by these chemicals. There's no scientific proof that their symptoms are caused by toxic air because the studies haven't been done. But as far as we can tell, regulators know almost nothing about what people in the Eagle Ford are breathing.
I've, had problems before with allergies, but these symptoms are different. What I had before were just mild breathing problems, and they were occurring maybe once a month when the allergens were high.
Lynn Buring and her husband were born in Karnes County. They moved to this house to enjoy the big skies and quiet nights outside.
Well, then suddenly this Eagle Ford shell stuff starts happening, and I noticed that there's stuff coming up into my throat, and my nose is shutting down, and there's this heaviness on my chest, and it feels like an elephant sitting here, and it feels like somebody's choking the air out of me, and I can't get a breath.
Lynn says her doctors blame her worsening asthma and her crippling migraines on the oil wells. It would be hard to say which well. More than 50 have been drilled within 2.5 miles of her home. Fred and Amber Lissy work a 564-acre, family-owned organic farm on the northern edge of the Eagle Ford. The Lissy family won't lease their land to an oil company, but that hasn't stopped their neighbors.
It just makes constant noise. They have bright lights on all night long, and that one was completed last summer, and it flared nonstop for a year.
We're standing on the road. We own that side of the road, and this is the neighbors where they're doing some massive frack job. Obviously, you can hear the noise, pretty loud. Sometimes it really echoes late at night, but that flame's almost always going. We don't feel safe having cattle or anything right here. If it did rain a whole bunch, or what kind of chemicals are coming off of this thing, we don't feel safe using this piece of land.
The chemicals released during oil and gas extraction include some of the most damaging volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, including benzene and toluene. These chemicals have been linked to cancer, neurological problems, and other serious illnesses. VOCs are released at every phase of oil and gas development: drilling, fracking, production, and processing. They're part of the fluid that's used to fracture the shale, and they're released from the earth when the rock is cracked open. VOCs seep from well bores, storage tanks, flares, and even pipelines. But oil fields in this part of Texas have an added danger: hydrogen sulfide. It's a naturally occurring gas you'll find in some shale areas of the country, but is especially abundant here. In low concentrations, it makes people sick. In high concentrations, it can kill.
We could smell, at times, hydrogen sulfide gas. We didn't know what it was at first. We could just smell rotten eggs. It was outside, very strong, very saturated. Then we could smell chlorine at times. Then we smelled crude oil at times. We knew what that was. I went to those 3 rig sites where they were drilling, and I told them, "You're making us sick," literally.
Cynthia Dupnick is among the people who say they've gotten sick since the boom began. I decided to visit her.
This is a daily log of what we smell, if we can identify it. I will note on here its chemicals, and I will note if we have any side effects from it. And I'm doing it, and I'm going to continue doing this because I'm noticing we're gradually developing new symptoms off and on.
Cynthia lives in this small house where she cares for her disabled daughter.
My daughter has nosebleeds. I have sores in my nose at times, off and on, that don't want to heal correctly. There's something wrong about that picture, especially when we didn't have it before.
When she could no longer tolerate the air, Cynthia complained to the agency responsible for policing air polluters, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, or TCEQ. Since 2008, the number of wells in the Eagle Ford has skyrocketed, but the TCEQ has had its budget cut by 1/3. Hundreds of complaints have poured in over the past few years from Eagle Ford residents. We wanted to know what the TCEQ was doing about them. Over the course of 8 months, we made over a dozen interview requests. And for 8 months, the agency in charge of air emissions for hundreds of thousands of wells affecting millions of Texans refused even a telephone interview. The TCEQ did respond to us in an email. They told us, "The air monitoring data evaluated to date indicate that air pollutants in the Eagle Ford Shale area have not been a concern either from a long-term or a short-term perspective. Therefore, we would not expect adverse health effects, adverse vegetative effects, or nuisance odors in this area."
They found this word, fracking, which sounds like something you wouldn't say to your grandmother.
We did speak with Steve Everly of Energy in Depth, a research and public relations arm of the Independent Petroleum Association of America.
The Texas Commission on Environmental Quality has actually gathered literally millions of data points on air emissions in the Eagle Ford region specifically. And they have come out and say that, on balance, Eagle Ford shale development is not resulting in emissions that are threatening public health or causing any sort of high levels of air pollution that are of concern.
We looked into what the TCEQ was monitoring. According to experts, not much. While the agency does sporadic spot monitoring, we were shocked to learn that there are only 5 permanent air monitors in the entire Eagle Ford. That's 5 air monitors for an area nearly twice the size of Massachusetts. Karnes County is at the heart of oil and gas drilling in the Eagle Ford. You're looking at the closest air monitor. It's more than 20 miles away.
A lot of these events are very fleeting. They can be very intense. There can be a really high exposure to something like hydrogen sulfide or benzene, and then it dissipates. It seems unlikely to me that this air monitor would pick that up.
The TCEQ knows there are problems. In this 2011 memo, the TCEQ acknowledges extensive records of underestimated or previously undetected emissions from oil and gas sites. These are not isolated instances, but have occurred statewide and indicate a pattern.
TCEQ is not a very good regulatory agency. In fact, if anything, it's the contrary. They specialize in making rules difficult and hoops difficult to jump through. But the fact of the matter is, when it's all said and done, time and time again, you see the violation of the law and no enforcement.
I previously to this position worked for the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality for 12 years inspecting industrial plants. So I got a very good bird's eye view going into refineries, chemical plants, power plants, gas processing plants, and more. But I also dealt with over 1,000 citizen complaints. I concluded that when citizens complained about air pollution, they were always right. There was a problem.
We've looked at actual data, and so have state regulators. And the consistent thing that we've seen is that there are emissions. There are emissions from development, and I think everyone would admit that. But the question is whether it's reaching a public health threshold and that it would threaten public health. And the data have consistently shown that that threshold is not, that threshold's not being crossed.
The data haven't shown it because the data we need don't exist. We know very little about air quality in the places with the most drilling, places like Karnes County.
In the Eagle Ford, we know that there are hundreds of complaints of people who live near these facilities, and they're complaining of symptoms. A lot of them are symptoms that we associate with hydrogen sulfide or VOCs or other chemicals. Something like benzene, the effects don't show up until decades later. You know, we know benzene causes leukemia, but do you really want to wait 30 years before seeing leukemia in a place before you consider that as scientific proof?
What's going on in the Eagle Ford Shale is more subtle than a refinery explosion or an oil spill. A toxic soup of chemicals is being released into the air day in and day out. We won't know the effects of these emissions for a very long time.
The chemicals in the air, we can't get away from them because we live here, we're here 24/7. We cannot get away from it. We don't have another home to go to.
Which is one of the main chemicals used in the frac solution.
However, these fears are dismissed by a claim often used in the sales pitch for shale gas development.
Hydraulic fracturing.
Hydraulic fracturing.
Method used for drilling natural gas.
They call the process fracking. Water and chemicals under pressure break up rock to get to the elusive natural gas supply it holds. It's a process that's been used for 60 years.
Fracking is a technology that's been around for about 60 years. Basically, you're injecting into deep wells water under high pressure with sand to crack open rocks to release hydrocarbon molecules like oil and natural gas.
The first use of hydraulic fracturing was near Duncan, Oklahoma, in my state, Oklahoma. That was way back in 1949.
Fracking has got a very long history because it was certainly used in anger back in the 1940s to stimulate oil production.
It's been around over 50 years. And we do approximately 35,000 wells a year, nearly 1 million wells without one documented case of groundwater contamination.
60 years to be able to use this thing that is called hydraulic fracturing in more than 1.1 million wells just in the US of A alone.
The industry will tell you they've been fracking for 60 years. So what they're doing is just a little wordplay there.
The apologists will tell you that this is that the people have been fracking wells for 80 years or 100 years, and they frack hundreds of thousands of wells and whatnot. But that's totally misleading.
This process that is being used for extracting gas from tight shales is drastically different from the conventional processes. You'll hear people say that it's a process that has been used for 60 years, and parts of it have, but not to this magnitude. This is a major step change.
Yes, there's an element of truth that hydraulic fracturing is a well-known
technology that's been used millions of times. But the particular form of hydraulic fracturing that we're talking about here has only been in use for about a decade. It began to be developed in the 1990s. It was, quote, perfected in a particular shale formation in Texas in the late 1990s. And to date, there have only been about 20,000 shale gas wells developed using the kind of hydraulic fracturing that we're talking about. In particular, slick water, high volume hydraulic fracturing from what are called long laterals or subhorizontal wells. That's a technology that was not around in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. The experiment started in the 1990s, and it's only now coming into its own. So there's not 60 years of experience with this particular form. There's not millions of wells of experience. There's roughly a decade of experience in about 20,000 wells in roughly 4 or 5 major plays around the world.
If this stuff was proven and time tested, they wouldn't have been experimenting with atomic bombs up until the 70s.
There are very substantial differences. It's not just scaling up the logistics.
It's less than a decade old.
First, I want to ask all three of you in response. Do any one of you know of one case of groundwater contamination that has resulted from hydraulic fracturing? Start with you, Mr. Silver.
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Mr. Giles?
I understand there's some anecdotal evidence, but I don't know that it's been firmly established.
So the answer is no. You don't know of it. All right, Mr. Larson?
I'll have to respond in writing. I'm not aware of all of our studies on that topic.
Well, but you've already answered. You're not aware of it. That's the question I asked you.
Mr. President, Senator from Oklahoma.
No evidence that the hydraulic fracturing at issue has resulted in any contamination or endangerment of underground sources of drinking water.
Any fear of retributions or reprisals is that up until today, 800,000 wells later, there's not a single person who has come up with evidence to say this is attributable to just shale.
We've been doing 100,000 of these wells a year for many, many years. The technology has been around for 60 years. Basically, the technology is safe as far as we can tell. How much more study is really required?
No proven cases of contamination flies in the face of allegations by many critics, but the uncertainty
what the companies are thinking of in their mind when they say hydraulic fracturing hasn't caused anything is they mean the actual activity of the completion down at 4,000 feet or whatever. I think what a lot of the public is thinking is they think hydraulic fracturing is the whole thing. It's the drilling of the well, it's the casing of the well, it's the completing of the well, it's all of that. So if that's your context, then I can understand why they would say, you're not telling me the truth, because we do know that in Wyoming and in Colorado and in Ohio and in Northeast Pennsylvania and in West Virginia, there have been evidences of gas migration, contamination, and it wasn't there before you guys started drilling, so don't tell me it's a coincidence.
The fracking process itself, the regulations involving the actual fracking process, in my opinion, don't need much more than what are already there, because that's the process that has the least likelihood, not zero, but the lowest probability of causing problems.
It's virtually impossible for the fracking itself to cause the gas migration, but it is very possible for you to have gas migration associated with the drilling operations if you don't get the casing and the cementing right. In every one of those cases which we identified where the claim was this is due to hydraulic fracturing and the industry is saying no, it's not, hydraulic fracturing can't do it, the truth is right here in the middle. And the truth is it was tied to drilling operations. It was because they did bad cement jobs and that gas leaked up into the annulus until the pressure built up enough that it leaked out and it went up into the aquifers.
I'm more concerned with everything at the surface. The closer you are to the surface, the closer you are to humans. The closer you are to the surface, the closer you are to groundwater. During the drilling process, you're close to the surface because you're at the surface doing the drilling, and you're at the surface with the chemicals that are necessary to do the drilling, and it's near the surface where the problems with gas migration are occurring, not 4,000 or 5,000 meters down where the shale is.
I thought I chose my words very carefully to say.
Yes, but it all comes down to how you ask the question.
Is there any evidence that hydraulic fracturing, however, can affect aquifers and water supplies?
There is evidence that it can certainly affect them. I am not aware of any proven case where the fracking process itself has affected water, although there are investigations ongoing.
As we see it today, we have not had a single documented case where somebody has come to us and said, it's as a direct result of your specific hydraulic fracturing activity.
This was a documented case, that the DEP documented it, and it was an official case, it was acknowledged. However, now it is under wrap because of the non-disclosure agreement. The methane that was found in the aquifer was thermogenic methane that was coming from the shale layer, because there was obviously a failing in the well casing. So are there any documented cases that natural gas drilling for unconventional gas, because that includes well casing, all that hydraulic fracturing, as I have it, only refers to a process when the perforation takes place.
I thought I chose my words very carefully to say documented cases that shows the direct causal effect between the activity, the contamination, and hydraulic fracturing. I thought that's what I said. But if you talk about mining in general, of course there are lots of documented cases. But I think let me also move forward very quickly to say
one case, documented case of groundwater contamination.
Not a single person has come up with evidence.
There's never been a documented case in almost.
All right. Let's do this in an orderly fashion again. Anyone in the first row? This one?
Yeah.
I do have a testimony. I can't do it right.
Can you identify yourself?
My name is Kimberly Staub.
And your address?
It's 101 Walnut Road, Mount Pleasant Township. Again, let me start. My name is Kimberly Staub, and I do live in Mount Pleasant Township. I am direct